I came home in uniform, but it was a dead man's text that broke me open. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Christmas. While I was standing in the middle of my apartment kitchen making coffee, I wasn't going to finish. I read it once and put the phone down. Then I picked it up again, because sometimes the first reading of something is just your brain refusing to cooperate, and the second reading is where you actually absorb it. Don't come home this year. No period at the end. No explanation before it. No context. Just those 5 words, followed 3 seconds later by a second line that appeared on my screen like it had been composed by someone who wanted to make certain there was no room for negotiation. It's better for everyone if you stay where you are. I set the phone face down on the counter. The coffee maker sputtered and finished its cycle. Steam rose from the carafe and curled toward the ceiling and dissolved. Outside my apartment window, a city I had lived in for less than a year moved through its ordinary morning at full speed. Buses, delivery trucks, the neighbor above me whose alarm went off at 6:15 and again at 6:43, and again at 7, a routine I had come to know the way you come to know anything you have no power over. I stood very still and tried to understand what I had just read. My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 31 years old. I have spent the last 8 years serving in the United States Army in 3 different states on 2 overseas deployments across a stretch of time that has felt, in retrospect, like watching my own life from the window of a moving vehicle. Things passing, not stopping. 8 years of missed holidays. I want you to understand what that number actually means, not as an abstraction, but as a series of very specific absences. The Thanksgiving I spent in a chow hall in Germany, eating reconstituted mashed potatoes while my family ate my grandmother's. The 4th of July my niece was born, which I heard about in a message 17 hours after the fact. My best friend's wedding, which I attended by way of a shaky FaceTime propped against a water bottle on a desk in a barracks room while the connection dropped 4 times during the vows. My grandfather's funeral. My college roommate's cancer diagnosis, and then remission, and then the celebration dinner I had promised to attend and rescheduled 3 times. Through all of it, through every reassignment and redeployment and month that became 2 months that became a year in a place that was not home, the one fixed point in my mental map was my father. Thomas Calloway, 67 years old, retired electrician, reader of westerns and watcher of baseball, a man who had strong opinions about coffee and weak opinions about almost everything else, who had voted in every election since he was 18 and could tell you exactly how to wire a circuit breaker, but could not program a television remote to save his life. A man who said "I'm proud of you" at the end of every phone call, even the ones that were only 3 minutes long, even the ones where we barely said anything. The house on Ridgeway Lane had been in our family for 42 years. He had raised me and my brother Daniel in it. He had grown old in it. And the knowledge that it existed, that he existed in it, that there was a chair at that kitchen table with my name on it even when I wasn't in it, had been the anchor that kept me tethered across the distance. This was supposed to be the year I sat in that chair. I had requested the leave in September, filed the paperwork myself, confirmed the dates 3 separate times with 3 separate people to make sure nothing could fall through. I had a flight booked for December 23rd. My bag was half-packed in the corner of the bedroom, the good duffel, not the Army-issue one. I had a gift on top of my dresser, wrapped carefully in silver paper, a first-edition collection of Louis L. Amer westerns I had found in a used bookstore in October, because my father had mentioned only once, offhandedly, that he had read them as a teenager, and I had filed that information away for 4 months, waiting for the right occasion. 63 days of counting down, and now my phone was on the kitchen counter, and the text from my father's number was telling me not to come. I typed back 1 word. Fine. Then I powered the phone off, put it in the kitchen drawer, underneath the takeout menus and the dead batteries I kept meaning to throw away, and made myself go to work. The 5 days that followed were the quietest stretch of time I can remember outside of deliberate isolation. I worked. I went to the gym and ran until my legs stopped working properly and my brain finally, mercifully, went quiet. I made meals for one and ate them standing at the counter. I watched television without absorbing any of it. I did not look at my father's contact in my phone. I did not call him, because if I called him, I would have to hear him explain himself. And I was not ready for that. Not ready for the particular pain of hearing a reason from the person whose opinion of you have arranged your entire adult life around. I told myself that families were complicated, that this wasn't the first difficult moment we'd navigated, that in January I would call, and we would figure it out, and it would be one of those things that looked worse in the middle than it actually was. I told myself this with the same focused conviction I had used to get through situations that were objectively more dangerous, and it worked about as well. Christmas morning arrived gray and very cold. I turned my phone back on at 7 in the morning. I stood at the kitchen window while it powered up, watching the snow that had fallen overnight lie flat and undisturbed on the street below, because it was early and no one was out yet, and for a brief moment, the city looked like a city that had decided to begin again. Then the notifications started. They kept coming. The sound of them, the rapid, overlapping chime of accumulated contact, was its own kind of alarm. I walked back to the counter. 10 missed calls. My mother, my brother Daniel. My Aunt Patricia, who never called anyone unless something was very wrong. My cousin Renata. My grandmother, who had last called me directly in 2021, for reasons I still don't fully understand, because she didn't entirely trust the concept of cellular service and usually communicated through my aunt as an intermediary. And one more. At the very bottom of the list, the most recent, time-stamped at 6:47 in the morning on Christmas Day. A number I didn't recognize with a 312 area code. The voicemail preview loaded slowly. 2 words appeared before the text was cut off. Law office. I stood in my kitchen in my socks and my oversized army sweatshirt, the one from Fort Campbell that had been through 4 moves and should have been retired years ago, and I stood there looking at those 2 words for a long moment before I pressed play. The voice on the recording was measured and professional, with the careful cadence of someone who had spent decades delivering news that landed hard. Miss Calloway, my name is Robert Gaines. I'm a partner at Gaines & Associates, based in Chicago. I've been attempting to reach you in connection with a matter involving your father, Thomas Calloway. Please return my call at your earliest convenience. I want to emphasize that this is urgent. I played the message again. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not the counter, not the couch, the floor, with my back against the cabinet and my knees pulled up and the cold of the tile coming through my socks. I don't entirely know why the floor. Only that my legs had developed an opinion about weight-bearing, and the floor was already there. I called the number back. He answered on the second ring. Gaines & Associates. This is Sarah Calloway, I said. My voice came out level. After 8 years, I could do level even when nothing else was. You left me a voicemail. There was a brief pause. A chair adjusted. Papers somewhere. Miss Calloway, yes, thank you for returning my call so quickly. A longer pause, the kind that precedes something that won't land cleanly no matter how carefully you phrase it. I'm afraid I have difficult news. About my father, I said. Yes, 1 word, and he let it stand alone because it needed to. Miss Calloway, your father passed away 3 days ago. The kitchen was very still. 3 days ago, exactly when the text had arrived, the text from his phone, the text telling me not to come home. That doesn't add up, I said. Not because I disbelieved him. Some cold, perfectly clear part of my mind had already started connecting the timeline, had already felt the shape of what this was, but because you say things like that in moments like these, while the rest of you catches up. We spoke 2 weeks ago. He asked about my flight. I understand how shocking this must be, Mr. Gaines said quietly. And I am very sorry. But I need to tell you something important before we go any further, because it's the reason I've been trying to reach you specifically. I pressed the back of my head against the cabinet. Okay. Your father made arrangements with our office. Formal arrangements, documented, witnessed. Among those instructions was a specific directive. If you ever received a message from his phone telling you not to come home, you were to be contacted by our office immediately. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car started somewhere on the street below. He planned for that message, I said slowly. specifically for that message. He prepared for the possibility that such a message might be sent, yes. Mr. Gaines, I kept my voice even, it was a discipline. The message came from his phone, you're telling me my father didn't send it. That is correct. Because he was already gone. Yes, we have the hospital records. The message was sent approximately 2 hours and 16 minutes after the official time of death. I closed my eyes. Someone used his phone, I said. Yes. Someone who was in that house after he died. Miss Calloway, Mr. Gaines spoke carefully, the way you speak when you're trying to give someone information without collapsing it into a conclusion they need to reach themselves. Your father's instructions were very clear that you should not discuss any of this with members of your family until you'd had the opportunity to come to our office. He was specific on that point. Why, I asked, what else is there? The pause before his answer was very brief, but I felt it. Your father left detailed estate instructions, he said, and you are the primary beneficiary. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling of my apartment kitchen. Everything, I said. Almost everything, yes. I sat on the floor for another minute after we arranged the appointment. Sat there, while the Christmas morning street below slowly came to life, while the city decided to continue regardless, while the snow held on the sidewalks and then didn't. Then I got up, poured the cold coffee down the drain, and started packing a bag. I drove to Chicago the next morning. It was a 4-hour drive through flat winter landscape, the highway cutting through farmland that had gone the gray-brown of late December, interrupted by occasional towns that appeared at 70 miles per hour and disappeared just as fast. Water towers, grain elevators, a billboard for a personal injury attorney whose face had been partially weathered away, so that he appeared to be promising legal representation from somewhere between this world and whatever comes next. I didn't have the radio on. I needed the silence to think, and I needed to think in the same deliberate, sequential way I had been trained to process information in the field, chronologically, causally, without sentiment distorting the sequence. One thing at a time. Only what is known. Hold the rest until the picture clarifies. What I knew, my father had died 3 days ago of a cardiac event, at a hospital he had been driven to by my brother. Someone had used his phone within hours of his death to send me a message designed to keep me away. He had anticipated this possibility months in advance. He had gone to a lawyer and left specific, documented instructions for exactly this scenario. He had named me as the primary beneficiary of his estate. What I did not know, who had sent the message. Although I was beginning to have a theory that I was struggling not to solidify into a conclusion. Daniel had been living in the house for 3.5 years. I knew the broad shape of that story, job loss, a plan to regroup, our father offering the spare room because that was who our father was, the kind of man who made space without making you feel the space was conditional. What I didn't know was what had happened beneath that surface, whether the regroup had ever happened. Whether the plan had ever become a reality, or whether it had remained a plan the way some things do, always 6 months from execution, always just about to take shape. I thought about my brother, 34 years old. Bright, careful, the kind of person who was good at things and knew it, which could be a gift or a trap depending on the year. I thought about the phone calls between us which had grown shorter without either of us acknowledging they were getting shorter. Which had stayed on the surface, how are you, fine, how's dad, good, take care, in a way that I had told myself was just our rhythm, just how we were as siblings, rather than something being actively managed. I thought about what it meant to be the one who stayed. To watch a parent age from the inside of the house. To drive him to appointments and calibrate your schedule around his, and be the person who was there for the ordinary, daily accumulation of care that never gets the credit that crises do. And to watch your sister, overseas, uniformed, doing something that people called heroic, and wonder, privately, in the dark moments, what that meant about the kind of care you were providing. I thought about what that arithmetic might do to a person over 3 years, and I thought about what might happen when that person looked at a document and saw their name was not on it. I didn't let myself decide before I had the facts, but I felt the shape of it forming, and I drove the rest of the way in silence, and I didn't try to push the shape away. Gaines and Associates occupied the second floor of a brownstone on the north side of Chicago, a building that communicated its age and its stability without advertising either. Small gold lettering on the door. A waiting room with good furniture and no television. The kind of practice built on decades of quiet work. Rather than billboard visibility. Mr. Gaines himself came out to greet me. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the measured, unhurried manner of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that his work existed inside the worst chapters of other people's lives. He shook my hand with both of his. "Miss Calloway, I'm very sorry about your father." "Thank you," I said. "Let's get started." He led me to a small conference room overlooking a courtyard where a bare dogwood tree stood in a square of frozen soil. On the table was a thin portfolio of documents, and beside it, on the side closer to where I would sit, a sealed envelope. My father's handwriting on the front. I would have known it anywhere, blocky capital letters, slight lean to the right, the particular way he pressed hard enough that you could feel the indentation on the other side. He had written my name across the envelope, Sarah, and underlined it once. I sat down. Mr. Gaines sat across from me and folded his hands. "Before the formal documents," he said, "your father asked that you read the letter first. He was specific about the order." I picked up the envelope. The paper was ivory, heavier than standard, the kind bought for something important. The seal was intact. I opened it carefully and drew out 2 pages of yellow legal paper, the kind my father had always kept in a drawer next to the landline phone, covered front and back in that familiar hand. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to keep you away from home after I was gone. I'm sorry that's where we ended up. I want you to know this letter was the hardest thing I've written since the card I put in your bag the first day you left for basic training. 11 months ago, I was diagnosed with a progressive heart condition. The doctors were honest with me, and so I tried to be honest with myself in return, which is harder than it sounds. I had time left, but the shape of that time was defined for me, and I wanted to use it carefully. What follows is going to be difficult to read. I want you to understand, before you read it, that every decision I made was made with clear eyes and genuine love, not for one of you more than the other, but in a way that accounted for what I actually knew about both of you. Daniel has lived in the house for 3.5 years. You know this. What you likely don't know, because he worked very hard to keep it from everyone, and because I didn't want to put that weight on you while you were overseas, is that the situation is considerably more complicated than a job loss and a temporary arrangement. There have been significant financial difficulties, decisions I tried to help him correct, a pattern that developed over time, slowly enough that it was easy to explain each individual piece as a bad month or a setback or an exception, until I stepped back and saw the whole picture. Your brother is not a bad person, Sarah. I want you to hold that. He's a person who got scared and then couldn't find his way back to solid ground, and the longer it went on the harder it got to admit. The house has been in our family for 42 years. Your grandfather built the back porch himself, on a July weekend in 1982, and I helped him as a 25-year-old who didn't know what he was doing, and he never once made me feel like I was in the way. I want that porch to still be there for the next generation. I want the house to stay in the family, and to be protected. For those reasons, I have left the house, the property behind it, the savings account, and the parcel in Crawford County to you. I want to be careful how I say what comes next. This is not about who was here and who was away. I know what the years overseas cost you, Sarah. I know the holidays and the events and the ordinary Tuesday evenings that accumulate into something you can't get back. I never mistook your absence for not caring. I saw it for what it was: service and sacrifice, and a particular kind of courage that I respected in a way I'm not sure I ever fully articulated. The will reflects what I believe is right, given everything I know. It does not reflect how much I love my children, which is equal and without condition, and is not the kind of thing that fits in a legal document. If someone used my phone to send you that message, it means they found the will. It means the fear of what was coming overtook the better part of them, and they tried to buy time. I understand that, even if I can't excuse it. Go to the lawyer, read the documents, then go home. And whatever happens next, your brother is still your brother. Hold on to that if you possibly can. It's what I would want most. With all the love I have. Dad. I folded the letter back along its creases. I placed it flat on the table in front of me. I looked at the dogwood tree in the courtyard for a moment, bare-limbed and still. Mr. Gaines waited. "The will," I said finally. He slid the portfolio across. S. I read it slowly, though the letter had already told me what was inside. The house on Ridgeway Lane, the half-acre behind it, a savings account with a balance I hadn't expected, the Crawford County parcel, 20 acres of timber and creek land that had been in the family since my grandfather's time, all of it in my name, all of it without division. "He amended this 8 months ago," Mr. Gaines said. "He was very thorough. He also requested that we preserve the phone activity records from the day of his passing." He turned his laptop to face me. A call log. A missed call from a neighbor at 11 in the morning. 2 missed calls from Dr. Reyes, whom I assumed was his cardiologist. An outgoing call to the hospital at 1:15 in the afternoon, duration 11 minutes. And then, at 4:47 in the afternoon, an outgoing text message to my number. "Don't come home this year." Below it, the hospital's notation. Time of death recorded, 2:31 p.m. The text had been sent 2 hours and 16 minutes after he died. I stared at the timestamp until the numbers stopped meaning anything and then started meaning everything again. "Who reported the death?" I asked. Mr. Gaines closed the laptop with a soft click. "Your brother Daniel placed the call to emergency services." I pulled into the driveway on Ridgeway Lane at 3 in the afternoon. The house looked exactly as it always had. 2 stories, white siding my father repainted every 5 years on a schedule he kept as faithfully as any appointment, the wraparound porch my grandfather had built by hand, the old maple in the front yard that Daniel and I had climbed until we were old enough to know better and occasionally climbed anyway. The porch light was on, the amber kind, the kind my father claimed was easier on the eyes. He wasn't there to have switched it on that morning. I sat in the car for a moment, not delaying, processing. There is a technique the Army teaches, not formally but through repetition and context, of entering a situation having already established your purpose. You know why you're there before you go in. You know what you need to do. You set aside the emotional accounting until later, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much to let it run the operational part of the moment. I knew why I was there. I got out of the car. Daniel opened the door before I made it up the porch steps. He stood in the doorframe in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, unshaven, with the particular pallor of someone who has not slept adequately in days. He looked at me like I was something he had not expected to see, like a proof, arriving, that something he had been hoping to prevent had not been prevented. "Sarah," his voice was smaller than usual. "I thought the message said." "I know what the message said," I replied. "I also know who sent it." I stepped past him into the house. Living room smelled like it always had. Murphy's oil soap and old books and the faint ghost of the wood-burning fireplace, the one my father used every winter from November through March, which he claimed was about ambience, but I suspected was about the electricity bill. The furniture was the same it had always been. The plaid couch, the oak coffee table my father had built himself from a kit in 1987, the east wall bookshelf that bowed slightly under 40 years of accumulated reading. On the coffee table, plugged into a white charging cable that was not its original charger, because the original had given out, and my father had used a universal one he'd bought at the hardware store for $6. My father's phone. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at it. Daniel came in behind me and settled heavily into the armchair. My father's armchair, the one that had shaped itself over the years to the particular way my father sat, slightly sideways, left leg crossed over right, always facing the window. Something in my chest tightened at the sight of Daniel in it, and I let it tighten and let it pass. "I know what you're going to say," he said. "Tell me what happened the day he died," I said. "All of it, start at the beginning." He rubbed his face with both hands. He had a rough morning, his levels were off. I drove him to Dr. Ray's office and they wanted to do some additional monitoring, so they sent us over to the hospital. I stayed until about 1 o'clock and then he told me to go home and rest, said he'd call when they were ready to discharge him. A pause. He sounded okay. He was complaining about the hospital coffee, which I figured was a good sign. And then, the hospital called at 3. They said he'd had a sudden cardiac event, that they'd tried to intervene but he stopped, swallowed. It was fast. The doctor said it was very fast. And after that call, I said, you picked up his phone. The room went quiet. Daniel stared at the coffee table. At the phone sitting on it, its screen dark and ordinary. He didn't move. I found the will, he said finally, quietly, the way you say things when the pretense has become too heavy to hold. A month before he died. He'd left it on his desk when I drove him to an appointment, and I picked it up because I thought it was a bill and then I saw what it was. He looked up at me. My name wasn't on it. No, I said. I'm his son. I lived here. I was here every single day for 3.5 years. I know. And he left everything to the daughter who wasn't here, who called maybe once a month, who missed, he stopped, reordered himself. I'm not saying your service didn't matter. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I was here. And after the hospital called, I said steadily, you saw an opportunity. He flinched. I wasn't thinking clearly. I know. I just thought if I could buy some time, a few days, maybe talk to a lawyer, figure out if there was any grounds to contest. You sent a text from a dead man's phone, I said. 2 hours after he died. You sent it from his phone and you timed it so I couldn't call him to check because you already knew he was gone. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. I know, Daniel said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to say what it was, not I know, say the actual thing. He kept his eyes on the floor. When he spoke, it was slowly, without anywhere to hide. I used Dad's death to try to keep you away long enough to change what he decided. I sent that text so you'd think he didn't want you here. On the day he died, while he was still in the hospital. The words were ugly. They needed to be. Thank you, I said. We sat in the living room for a long time after that. Not in the formal way of a confrontation concluded, but in the exhausted, slow way of two people who have said the true thing and now have to figure out what comes next. Daniel talked. I had asked him, before the conversation could close in on itself, to tell me the real version of the last 3 years, not the abridged version he gave our mother, not the carefully managed version he had given our father, who had apparently seen through it anyway. The actual version. So he told me. The job loss I had known about, the company downsizing, the severance, the plan to take a few months and then find something better. What I hadn't known was that the few months had extended and the job market had been harder than expected, and he had taken on some freelance work that had turned into a partnership that had turned into a small business that had failed in less than 8 months and left him substantially in debt. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked. Pride, he said simply. And then it had gone on long enough that telling anyone meant explaining why I hadn't told them before, and that was worse. Dad knew. He shook his head slowly. He knew some of it, not the full amount. I don't think he knew the full amount. He knew enough, I said. It's in the letter. Daniel looked up. He left you a letter. I hesitated. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and drew it out, still folded along its creases, and held it across the coffee table. Read it, I said. He took it with careful hands and unfolded it slowly. I watched his face as he read. His expression moved through things I recognized and things I didn't, grief at some parts, surprise at others, and near the end, something that cracked open briefly and then was held together by sheer force of habit. He folded it back up and held it for a moment before returning it to me. He wasn't angry, Daniel said. No. He says he understood. Yes. He stopped, tried again. That's almost harder. I thought about that, about the particular cruelty of grace offered to someone who had been braced for punishment, how it removes every defense at once. He talked about you, I said. To me, when we'd call. He told me you fixed the back porch railing in April, that you learned to make his coffee exactly the way he liked it, that you drove him to his Tuesday appointments because he'd gotten nervous about the highway and didn't want to admit it. Daniel looked at the window. He said you were there, I continued. And he saw that. He valued it. The will isn't about what you were worth to him. It's about what he thought was the safest arrangement for something that mattered to him. Those aren't the same decision. I know that now, he said quietly. I'm not sure I knew it when I sent that text. What did you think was going to happen? I asked. Long term, if I hadn't come. He shook his head. I don't know, I genuinely don't know. I think I thought I'd figure something out. Contest it, or I don't know, I wasn't thinking past the next 48 hours. I was just trying not to drown. I sat with that for a moment. The image of my brother, alone in this house on the day our father died, holding a phone that wasn't his, making a choice that was desperate rather than calculated. I didn't want to soften it too much. It needed to stay sharp enough to mean something, to remain a thing he would have to carry and reckon with. But I also knew what it looked like, being underwater and reaching for anything within reach. I had seen it in the field. The way people behave when they are genuinely afraid, not the movie version of fear, which is loud and obvious, but the real version, which is quiet and tactical, and makes people do small, specific, terrible things in the hope that the small, terrible thing will postpone the larger catastrophe they're trying to avoid. The army had not taught me to excuse that, but it had taught me to recognize it, which was different. The house is mine, I said, legally and formally and without ambiguity. I know. But you've been living here, you grew up here, Dad is in every wall of this place. He waited. I'm not selling it, I said, and I'm not removing you from it, not unless that's what you want. He looked up. What I'm going to do, I continued, is have Mr. Gaines draw up a residency agreement, something formal that protects both of us, establishes your right to be here and establishes my ownership without leaving anything ambiguous or unspoken. I paused. What I'm also going to ask is that you get real help, not going through the motions help, a financial counselor, someone who can actually work through the debt situation with you, and something for the rest of it too. The part that's been accumulating while you told everyone you were fine. You mean a therapist? I mean whatever gets to the actual problem, I said. You've been alone with this for 3 years. That's too long. It changes the way you think about your options. He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Okay, he said finally. Okay like you mean it, or okay like you're trying to end the conversation. He almost smiled. In that almost smile, I saw the brother I had grown up with, the one who used to argue about baseball statistics with the same intensity most people reserved for important things, who had taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of this house on a Saturday morning when our father was working, and who had run alongside me for 2 blocks before I realized he'd let go. That person was still in there, underneath 3 years of accumulation. Okay like I mean it, he said, I think. Close enough, I said. We'll work on certainty later. That night we called our mother together. She cried for a long time, and then she was angry about the text message, specifically, pointedly angry, in the way that mothers become angry when their children have hurt each other, and Daniel took that without argument, which I thought was the most honest thing he could have done. We told her about the will and the lawyer and the arrangement I intended to formalize. She asked good questions. She said she would come up in the morning. When she said goodnight, her voice was ragged but steady, which was the voice of a woman who had been through difficult things and knew they had endings. We called our grandmother, who received the news about the text message with a long pause and then a single sharp question, which Daniel answered honestly, and then she said only that our father had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, and she said it the way she said everything, which was as a fact that required no emotional emphasis to land. I slept in my old room that night. It had been converted to a guest room years ago, different furniture, different curtains, the closet reorganized, but the window faced the same direction it always had, and the maple tree outside still moved its bare branches against the glass in the wind, the same pattern I had fallen asleep to for the first 18 years of my life. I lay in the dark and thought about the voicemail that had started this. The professional voice on Christmas morning, 2 words in the preview, law office. The way I had sat on the kitchen floor in my socks and dialed the number back, not knowing what I was walking into. I thought about my father going to that office, alone, and sitting across from a man he barely knew, and carefully constructing a plan for the possibility that the people he loved most might hurt each other after he was gone. Planning for it not because he thought poorly of us, but because he thought clearly about us. Because he knew us. That's a strange kind of love. The kind that looks unflinching at the worst that could happen and still makes arrangements to protect everyone involved, including the person who might do the worst thing. I stayed 2 weeks. In the mornings, I made coffee the same way my father had, measured and unhurried, and I drank it at the kitchen table where we had eaten 1,000 breakfasts. In the afternoons, I went through his belongings carefully, with Daniel beside me for most of it. We divided what needed to be divided and agreed on what should stay together, and had a 40-minute conversation in the garage about a collection of hand tools that was really, I think, a conversation about everything we hadn't said for the last 8 years, spoken in the safer language of whether to keep the router or donate it. I called Mr. Gaines on a Tuesday and told him about the residency arrangement. He said it was straightforward and could be drawn up within the week. I found the Louis L. Amer collection in the bag in my car and brought it inside. I put it on the second shelf from the top, where my father had always kept his favorites. It looked like it belonged there. I think it probably did. Daniel started making calls. He found a financial counselor through a county program that I hadn't known existed, which was humbling in the specific way that discovering affordable resources in your own community is humbling. The sense that something useful had been present all along, just not looked for. He made an appointment for the second week of January. He also applied for 3 jobs in the 2 weeks I was there. He told me about each one the evening after he sent in the application, with the careful, suppressed hope of someone who has been disappointed enough times to have learned not to project. I said the same thing each time, good. Not I'm sure you'll hear back, not they'd be lucky to have you, just good. Because good was the honest thing, and we had decided, somewhere in the living room on the first evening, to be honest with each other. My last morning, I sat on the front porch before sunrise with a cup of coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. A woman with a dog, the dog doing its methodical investigation of every surface it passed. A man in a down vest scraping ice from his windshield with the martyred expression of someone who knows this will happen again tomorrow. And a kid on a bicycle, improbably, in the middle of a December morning, working his way uphill with the cheerful absolute stubbornness of someone who had not yet fully learned that weather was allowed to have opinions about you. Daniel came out with his coffee and sat in the other chair. We didn't talk for a while, which was fine. The porch held us easily. It had been holding people for 42 years. When do you go back? He asked eventually. Day after tomorrow. He nodded, you'll come back to visit. It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. I'll come back. The street was fully awake now. Cars, kids heading somewhere. The ordinary noise of a neighborhood in forward motion, everyone carrying their own private inventory of loss and hope, and the business of getting through a day. I looked at the porch light above us. The amber kind. Still burning, though the sun was fully up now and it wasn't doing much practical work anymore. I reached up and switched it off. He had that on a timer, Daniel said. I know. Set it every October 1st, off every April 1st. He paused. He said the amber was easier on the eyes. He said that to me too. We sat for another minute. I think he just liked the warmth of it, I said. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, I think so too. I have thought about this often in the months since, about what my father understood that the rest of us were still learning. He understood that the people who love you are also, sometimes, the people most capable of making choices that hurt you. Not because love makes you cruel, though fear can, and he knew that, but because love and grief and money and pride, and the terror of being left with nothing all tangled together in ways that are genuinely hard to unsnarl, especially at the end of things, especially when time is running out, and no one is thinking clearly enough to distinguish between what they want and what they're afraid of. He understood that some things need to be documented, because the world runs on paperwork and good intentions alone are not binding. He got his affairs in order. He protected what mattered. He prepared for the scenario he hoped would never occur, and left the instructions precise enough that even when it did occur, there was a way through it. A path, marked out in advance by someone who had walked it already in his imagination and left signposts. I have thought about the moment he must have had, sitting in his house while Daniel was out somewhere, taking out the legal paper and the pen and writing 2 pages of words he hoped I would never need to read. Finding the language for things that must be strange to put into language, I love both of you equally, and I still made this decision, and here is why, and here is what I hope comes after. Writing it clearly, folding it, sealing it. Handing it to a lawyer and saying, "Give this to my daughter only if something goes wrong." That is a particular kind of love, not the comfortable kind, the clear-eyed kind, the kind that looks steadily at the worst that might happen and still makes arrangements to protect everyone involved, including the person who might cause the worst thing. I didn't fully understand, until that letter, how well my father knew us. He had seen Daniel's struggle without letting on that he had seen it, and he had grieved it quietly, the way he did most things. He had watched me from a distance through 8 years of deployment, and processed his pride in me into something that showed up in other people's conversations. Telling the hardware store owner, telling the neighbors, telling anyone who would hold still, because he was never entirely sure how to aim it directly at me without it deflecting off something. He had seen us both clearly, he had loved us both without condition, and he had still made a decision, because sometimes love requires that. The letter was the inheritance. The rest of it, the house, the land, the savings account, the parcel in Crawford County, that was all just the container for the letter. The legal scaffolding around the actual thing he wanted to leave us. Hold on to each other if you can. That sentence is in my wallet right now, folded into quarters, tucked behind my military ID, in the particular soft way of paper that has been opened and refolded many times. I don't take it out and read it. I don't need to anymore, but I like knowing it's there. I like the small weight of it. I drive up to Ridgeway Lane on long weekends when my schedule allows, which is more often now that I am stationed stateside. I have learned the particular rhythm of those drives, the water tower outside Millbrook where I know I'm an hour out, the Methodist church with its sign that someone has finally fixed, the tunnel of oak trees that closes over the road in summer and in December frames the sky in bare branches against gray. My hands know the turns. Daniel is still in the house. He got the call back in January, the one job out of 4 applications, and went in for the interview wearing our father's good blazer, which fit him nearly perfectly because he and our father were nearly the same size, something neither of us had ever really registered before. And he came home from the interview and called me before he'd even taken off his coat, which told me more about how he felt than anything he said. He got the job. He found a financial counselor at the county library program, a woman named Greta who apparently does not believe in being gently indirect about financial realities, which Daniel said was exactly what he needed, which I believed, because gentle indirectness was what had made the situation possible in the first place. They are working through it. It will take time. Some of it will be genuinely hard. He also found a therapist. He mentioned it in an offhand way in February in the middle of a phone call about something else entirely. The way people mention things they've been sitting with, inserting them into the conversation as casually as possible in case the casualness makes them easier to say. He said, "I started seeing someone, by the way, a therapist." And I said, "Good." And he said, "It's weird." And I said, "It's supposed to be weird at first." And we moved on. We eat dinner at the kitchen table when I'm there. We argue about baseball and agree about almost nothing, and I have learned that this is not a failure of the relationship but a feature of it, that we are people who find different things funny and have always had different politics, and make different choices about almost everything, and that this has always been true, and that our Father loved us both inside this truth. On the good evenings, when neither of us has anywhere to be and the weather has decided to cooperate, we sit on the back porch our grandfather built by hand in 1982, on a July weekend, with our father as his 25-year-old apprentice who didn't know what he was doing and was never made to feel like he was in the way. We sit there with coffee and we talk about our father, or we don't talk about him, and both of those things are all right. He is there either way. In the particular way the porch holds a person, in the worn spot on the armchair inside, in the bookshelf and the tool collection, and the way the coffee maker takes exactly 7 minutes if you fill it to the 6-cup line, which he discovered years ago, and noted on a post-it stuck to the machine that is still there, because neither of us has been able to bring ourselves to remove it. The porch light runs on his timer. On in October, off in April. Amber bulb, same wattage. I ordered a case of 12 online so I'd have spares. He said it was easier on the eyes. I think he meant something more than that. I think he meant that warmth matters, that the quality of light in a place where people come home says something about the people who keep it on. I think he was, in his quiet and particular way, telling the people he loved that they were worth a certain kind of welcome, that whoever arrived in the dark would find the house awake, and warm and waiting. I leave it on when I go to bed. Just in case. The dark has enough dominion as it is. The least we can do is keep a light burning for each other.